One of our Earth's most famous fault zones is the San Andreas Fault located in the state of California. There was a particularly large earthquake in 1906 which occurred along the San Andreas Fault and caused a lot of destruction throughout the city of San Francisco. Not only did a massive earthquake occur, but fires immediately followed the giant rumblings. Even though the earthquake and fire of 1906 caused widespread destruction, some people have lived to tell the story of their unbelievable suffering to fascinated yet concerned listeners. On April 18, 1906, a foreshock shook the San Francisco Bay Area about 20 to 25 seconds before the main event occurred. At 5:13 a.m., the actual shaking and rumbling of the earthquake took place, with an epicenter near San Francisco. Finally, violent aftershocks followed the giant quake that lasted for about 45 to 60 seconds. For this particular event, the Mercalli ratings varied between a 7 and a 9. This means that the worst damage that was caused included houses collapsing and pipes breaking. Also, the 1906 earthquake's rating on the Richter scale was between a 5.5 and a 6.5. The massive earthquake was felt from southern Oregon to the south of Los Angeles and as far inland as central Nevada. In the case of the 1906 quake, when the two stuck tectonic plates finally broke apart, it caused a rupture in Earth's crust that was about 296 miles long. After the initial shaking finally receded, an event of more than 30 fires took place in the San Francisco area. The fires were thought to be caused by broken gas mains and stoves, which were most likely damaged during the dramatic shaking of the actual earthquake. Unfortunately, when the San Francisco firemen tried to create fire barriers by setting fire to perfectly intact buildings, they failed in their task and ended up demolishing more than 50% of San Francisco's buildings that would have survived the fire but were instead destroyed by panicked firemen. Also, the water mains had been broken because of the earthquake, so there was no water supply for the firemen to use for their fire trucks, rendering them helpless against the fires. The deaths that were caused from the earthquake were estimated to be more than 3,000 people. Some of the known deaths were reported after the earthquake by the U.S. Army Relief Group. This special group recorded 498 deaths in San Francisco, 64 deaths in Santa Rosa, and 102 deaths in and near San Jose. But even more disturbing was the fact that about 250,000 people out of San Francisco's population of 400,000 people were estimated to be without any shelter or any home to live in. That's more than half of San Francisco's population. The fires that followed the giant earthquake lasted for 3 continuous days and caused massive destruction for buildings of all shapes and sizes and affected a 4.7 square mile district of land. There were approximately 24,671 wood buildings that were destroyed and 3,168 brick buildings that were destroyed, which totaled 28,188 buildings altogether that were damaged or completely destroyed by the 1906 dramatic event. Some of the buildings included Stanford University and a City Hall building. A train even tipped off its train tracks because of the sudden shaking of the quake. San Francisco's government also went through a stressful turn of events. Because of all the immense destruction that was caused, the estimated cost of city repairs, which included fixing buildings and roads, was more than $400 million. The earthquake alone cost San Francisco $80 million. The San Francisco earthquake and fire also caused very disturbing memories for the limited number of survivors that lived to tell the stories of their experience. One eyewitness explained his experience of a burning hotel. When the fire caught the Windsor Hotel at 5th and Market Streets, there were 3 men on the roof and it was impossible to get them down. Rather than see the crazed men fall on with the roof and be roasted alive, the military officer directed his men to shoot them, which they did in the presence of 5,000 people. Another eyewitness retold the most horrific sight that he had seen during the 3-day fires. The most terrible thing I saw was the futile struggle of a policeman and others trying to rescue a man who was pinned down in burning wreckage. The helpless man watched it in silence till the fire began burning his feet. Then he screamed and begged to be killed. The policeman took his name and address and shot him through the head. During and after the earthquake, there were many eyewitnesses that survived to tell their stories and opinions on the 1906 earthquake and fire. The 1906 earthquake is still considered one of the largest earthquakes in the history of the world, not to mention the unbelievable occurrence of many large fires which only added to the mammoth amount of damage. But just try to save room in your heart and remember the people that suffered damage and losses during the famous yet devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fires.